I don't think I, and now that I think about it, my apologies, I don't think I put the link out to the last recording. So I'll get up on the recordings. I'll get up on the recordings and get it posted here in just later today. So sorry if there's a lot of background noise, kind of in a different spot in my house. So hopefully it won't be too bad. This should be our last session of our advanced data modeling class. So just kind of a reminder, we'll leave this stuff out here in Slack, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see this. Right, so we have this Slack channel that's in the middle of my screen. Let me get rid of this. And we use the advanced data modeling class channel itself. In chat, let me go ahead and add the link to that in case there's anybody that has not joined our Slack community. That's not the place I wanted to put it. Got it over here. So make sure you get into that. Feel free to have conversations, ping any of us. Anything around this user group that we have going on. Speaking of the user group, we do have a meeting coming up on Tuesday. That's going to be our evening meeting, our monthly meeting. So if you got on early, you heard Michelle and I kind of talking about trying to get a little bit prepared on that. We have a speaker lined up. We haven't gotten their profile yet. So we're working on doing that. If not, we'll punt to something else. So we'll come up with something. So hopefully join us there. All right. Today, where we're at is in pretty much the last module that has content. So this was a lot of review, and last week it dove into a lot of good questions that also kind of came up, and we worked on solving them. So we have a bunch of slides to go through. Before we get into this, we'll talk about Module 6 Lab if people want to do it later. Module 7, from what I remember, was just kind of the follow-up type of thing. So I think today we're going to call it pretty much done. And as we're thinking about it, hopefully we'll have some time towards the end of going, we want to continue these lunchbox sessions every Thursday, so what do we want to cover next? This is the last slide. Can everybody see this okay? Is it big enough for y'all?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. So this is the last slide that we hit on, which was talking about the difference of using the function distinct and values. And it's recommended to use values across the whole report. Whenever, remember, values is going to return the blank row that is added for the referential integrity violations, where distinct won't. So just kind of know the difference of them and make sure you use them appropriately. All right. One of the other best practices that they recommend is avoid using the if error or is error functions, which is really interesting because the Power BI quick measures themselves will use these functions, and which is one of the reasons why you see a lot of people don't use the quick measures. It might help you kind of get an idea of how to start producing something, but try to go back and refactor what they have in there to do better. Some of the common places.
Remove your breakfast plate.
I'm sorry, is there a question, or just do we need to get someone on mute? We good? Okay.
Kevin, I think you're the only one who can mute.
Oh, okay. Let me grab participants.
There we go.
Yeah, it looks like that's taken care of. Okay, sorry about that. So avoid using these because the reason that you want to avoid them is they perform step-by-step execution, right? So it's slower. So some of the examples that it's trying to give is around using the find and the search functions. You'll see in this example down below, if you have this if error search, because I guess search is going to return an error whenever this string isn't found in that. Obviously, it doesn't tell us what the difference is going to be. That's fun. But you'll want to come up with a different way of doing it. So let's see. Trying to read back through some of this. I read them last week and didn't read them again this week. Another good example here is talking about using divide, right? If you use the divide, the operator, the slash, you could get the divide by 0, but the function like divide itself takes care of that for you. Instead of using like checking for an is error, these functions here, the ones that they have examples down below, the find and the search, you could give it an extra parameter that says what should be returned instead of when the string isn't found, which helps you avoid using these two if error is error functions. So those are good techniques to make sure you think your code performs better and is avoiding those error functions. The built-in function of is blank, rather than doing a comparison of a value equal to blank, is faster. So you'll want to think about using that instead of something comparing it to blank. Why it's faster, I really couldn't explain, but that's what Microsoft is trying to tell us here. Probably a lot of it is just because it's a function-based language, and things that work off of functions is going to be a whole lot better. Let's see. Utilizing the filter all on a column name. If you're trying to ignore filters applied, it's a good way of writing it. Behind the scenes, it really is going to kind of write some of that anyways. So again, let me read through this. Sorry, I ran out of time getting ready here. Where what I think it's trying to tell us here is when you have this example, it's going to change it into this type of code anyways. So it's always better to apply your filters at the desired column rather than the whole table. And using all along with the filter function helps you change context, right? To keep some of the current context in the other places. Let me grab these links if there's more articles that you want her to read from these guys. I'll put them in the chat. Any questions or anything, right? I feel like I'm going kind of fast, because I feel we've covered a lot of this before. So a lot of it is review. So feel free to just kind of stop me. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to just kind of skim over these things and see if we hit on something that we really need to be talking about.
Kevin, it's Michelle.
Yeah.
I saw an article the other day. It was kind of talking about the difference between all versus remove filters. And I didn't know if that was something I needed to really put in my head. I got the feeling that they added the option for remove filters because all could also be used to make a table.
Yeah, so all does serve two purposes. Let me see, I think I have, bring this window over and get to one of my new favorite places to go. Oops, that's not where I want it to be. So if we look at the all function, right, and we have our window for over here. So it returns all the rows in the table and it ignores any filters. So it is kind of special, but it's also a modifier function within Calculate. So the remove filters was added recently, and it clears the tables from the specified, clears the filters from the specified tables or columns. And you could put multiples within it. I think in all, it's just going to end up with the one column or the one table. So there's a little bit more functionality you could do. But I would definitely recommend, if you want to know, it's just, you know, that the all and the remove filters is going to be able to be used in a Calculate. I don't think you could use remove filters in a filter statement. I don't even know that that's going to be syntactically correct. So we start with evaluate, we go filter, remove filters, and we just bring in, say, the currency table. Yeah, you see I get an error on that, to where if I write this as, and I know there's no other filters really going on here, but just to kind of see how, oops, what errors come up. Currency again. This I think is going to work. If I go to syntax error. Why is it telling me there's a syntax error here? Just for fun, let me get rid of this. You're failing me. My brain is
Sorry,
failing me.
mean to
No, you're all right, because we should know how this works. Oh, because filter needs 2 arguments. Oh, because I got to do something else to filter. Sorry. I got to give it the filter expression. We're going to just say currency code. I don't know if those values are in here, but that was why. And that might have been why the first one failed as well. So, okay, so if we run this, we don't get any data just because I don't know all the data that's inside of here. But syntactically, it works, right? And now if I change this to remove filters, would you put a bad that in? So filter does format. So remove filters cannot be used as a table expression. It could only appear in a filter as a calculate, within Calculate. So that is one big difference, to where all serves multiple purposes.
Okay.
Right? So here we kind of do the same type of thing. Let's put this back to all. Let's put another evaluate here, and we'll do it as, you know, calculate and calculate table is roughly the same. So we're going to do currency, and then we could give modifiers. So here, all is going to remove all filters altogether. And I believe this would work. So we'll go ahead and run both. right? We got things here because we didn't put any other type of filter here. Now, if we put, so here, let's change because now we know USD as a currency code that's in there. We expect to get it, the one row here. And if we copy this filter condition down here, so now we should get the same results in both. So we get one row from the first one, we get one row from the second one, but also here where we couldn't change to use remove. And I think in remove filters, we have to give it at least one argument, and we could give it a table. So we'll say, again, there's no filters that are coming in here, but let's imagine this was in some other context that there was filters, like summarize columns or something like that, right? Then at this point, if I was doing something within the summarized columns and I needed to calculate a table, I would remove the filters from the outer query, the outer scope query. But again, I get the same result here. So I think remove filters within the calculate part is probably a little bit better to be using. It's a newer function, and that might have been what you were reading.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So we'll move on, talking here a little bit about summarize. So summarize is traditionally used to perform grouping of columns and to get results aggregating along with them. Now they recommend using the summarize columns function. It's newer, it's optimized. This is something that I still have on my list to kind of look at a little bit, but I thought what I heard is that the one thing is within a measure, if you're trying to produce using what's called a virtual table within a measure to look through to do something, you can't use summarize columns. You do have to use summarize, just the way that they're written. So I think that's the one difference on it. But if you look inside Power BI and you're doing your performance analysis, and you start looking at the DAX code that's generated, the majority of the time you're going to see a summarized columns in there, because that's what it's going to be doing in order to produce the data for your visualization to show. So that's a good function to learn more about, because it is newer. It is more optimized. I'll copy these links into the chat as well if you want to have even more reading. If you want to read things, just go and read the entire SQL BI blog post, right? That's just kind of where everything is at. Or watch all the videos. So it says, say here, that if you're going to just kind of get from a table and you're going to get the kind of the values that are in a column, then in multiple columns of it, then that's a good use of summarize, right? So again, if we go back over to our DAX.2, what it's talking about here is if we do summarize, let's pick something a little bit better. Let's use customer. And we'll do sometimes it's just easier to type the whole thing out, isn't it? Actually, I like drag and drop. So we're going to summarize. We'll give it the customer table. And we'll see if we get the summarization of company code or customer code and customer type. So the results are too large, so it's been truncated. Let's actually pick something that's a little bit better. Let's make this education. I'm hoping that there's going to be, yeah. So this is basically if you think about it from a different standpoint, what that's saying is give me all the unique values, the unique combination of values for education and customer type that's in the customer table. And that's what Summarize is doing for you. So now what is possible is you could add a measure onto this, and I could give it like total sales. And tell it that I want I believe there's a total sales measure in this data set. Should be, let me make this window. In sales. Sales amount is what it calls it. I format that so my syntax is correct. And if I run it, so now what I have is the unique combinations of these two columns, and then what the sales amount is for each one of those combinations. And then you see that what we didn't see the first time is we have a customer type called company, and the education is blank, and we ended up still getting now a value for that. So we get everything from the measure. Where Summarize columns is close to the same, but you notice what you first specify is what you want to do your group by column names by. Then if you want to do any filtering, then you add whatever you want to add on to it. So in this case, what I'm going to do is need to take customer off of this. And I'm going to tell it I want to group by these two columns. And then I'm going to add, again, our measure for sales amount here. I believe, so that is syntactically correct. I get the same thing. I didn't check what the whole performance was, but what Microsoft is trying to tell you, or what this best practice is telling you, is that you could use and get the same results in most, almost all the time. Well, you will get the same results. It's just this is going to be faster. I do think, though, you can't use Summarize columns inside a measure, a virtual table within a measure. So this was it's trying to introduce that newer function. Avoid using add columns in measure expressions. So the add columns is when you're trying to define something. You have a table that's a physical table inside your model, and then you for a measure, you're going to you do an add column function to it, and you're going to add something to that. Like it's almost like adding a calculated column, like maybe total sales to it, and then you're going to evaluate and read those total sales. I haven't read this article, but I'll put it back out there. But this is trying to tell you to avoid that. Probably should read some of these articles again. The reason it's saying not to use it, let me go ahead and see where that goes to once I open it, is because it downgrades the performance. So I believe what you would end up using is more like Summarize columns, like what we just talked about. Kind of go through this. You notice I even updated this a couple different times. So here it's talking about add columns. So if you got the whole product table, and you're going to add a column to it that is the year of the start date. And you're doing this within your measure, right? So this isn't a calculated column in the model. It's going to evaluate that every single time if it's in your measure when the measure's put together. So you might consider putting it as a calculated column. You might consider doing it a different way. I'm trying to see if they talk about. So you could use summarize. Again, I'd have to read through all of this to get to the point of what they're trying to talk about. I didn't study it that deeply. Here we're getting into what a measure kind of looks like. So I failed to be able to adequately describe this slide, so we'll move on. Unless somebody's got something they want to add and go deeper into it. All right. The next one is talking about doing string manipulation within within measures. So that's going to slow your measure down. The work is being done. It says that the calculation engine, when you use something like DAX Studio, whatever it calls it, the formula engine, right? The way you make measures faster is the more you could push back to what's called the storage engine, they're gonna run faster. The more that has to be done in the formula engine, it's going to be slower. So when you're manipulating the string, you're going to end up with a slower measure. So one of the things that you probably want to do is, if you're having to do that, is look, could you get it done during a model refresh time, right? Either a calculated column, or even better, a Power Query transformation, or can it be done all the way back at the source, right? But here, what it's kind of talking about is the example, right? You're trying to get usernames from something that's an email address, and you're trying to remove the app part of it. If you're doing that within a measure to look at different things, then you probably want to push it back to like the ETL time, the Power Query time. Anything working with strings is always considered very, very expensive. So here we're talking about a solution about kind of building out smaller models, and there's kind of a lot, I would say a lot of different debate approaches to having everything in one big model to having things in smaller models. We do a lot at the places that I'm at is to have some bigger models and to put a lot into that. Just because trying to explain to a lot of users different models to connect to find what they're looking for and to put everything else together, it doesn't train out very well. But we do in those cases also build out a model with what we call a subject area, right? So if we have a sales subject area versus a financial subject area, those would be two different models because you're not tending to ask the same questions against both. So we start that's where we start breaking it down. But we still could have 10 to 15 to 20, 30 or more tables within one of those models. So some people consider it to be a very large model. Some of it you could look at is what is your size of the grain within your fact table, and do you want to have different models based upon the grain that you need, or using different approaches that Power BI allows you to do. What it's talking about here is using the aggregation tables, right? Aggregation's a function within Power BI, so where it could import just an aggregate of the table, but then go to direct query when you need a lower level grain or a lower level detail. So, that's always a good approach as well. And especially if you're just using Power BI, consider that to help reduce your model. Knowing the model size is again back into DAX Studio, getting the metrics from it and everything, which is probably another hour-long item that we should probably cover again at some point. Models do tend to become the larger models that we have. I would agree with this, is they're harder to maintain, right? But also we have a more rigorous approach to maintaining it because we need to make sure we don't break things. In another approach of having a lot of smaller models, which we tend to do as well, especially as we're doing proof of concept of things, we'll produce smaller models and push them out, and they're there to address very specific questions or very specific business needs. The problem that I see on that side of it is we could have 2 or 3 models that have almost the exact same logic in it that to say to bring a set of records in, but then we got to model it just a little bit different because that part of the business is asking just the questions slightly different. So then when something changes and you need to say, I'm going to bring in this additional piece of data. Now I got 3 or 4 models I have to change rather than just one. So make sure you're thinking about all of that as you're producing your models and you're getting into more of a production type environment. And think about the different techniques. There's pluses and minuses to both, right? So this is definitely a consultancy answer of it really depends on when you call something large, when you call something small, or, and when you should have one model versus many models. Any questions on that? Okay. I don't know what everybody is doing. I would bet most people are building a new model every time they have a different question to answer, unless you have a lot of users hitting your models type of thing. So this slide, when I first went through it, I was very interested in it because for some reason it threw just this line out here called Power BI Monitor. And I've searched and tried to find it, and I couldn't find anything that's like a specific tool around that. But, this is just kind of going back to good data modeling techniques. So I honestly don't know why they have this on here, but I know we've talked about it before, right? So when you have a model, it's going to stand it up inside of memory, right? That's your import model mode. Some people have started calling import now cache, right? Because if you think about it, you have a data source, maybe a database that it's connecting to, and you're importing, and during that import, you're reshaping that data. And now you got a cached version of it that's in memory, and that's going to be very, very fast. But if you put everything in it and you don't filter down either the columns or the rows, now you're taking too much memory. And even though everything is inside memory, if you got to go through all of that extra stuff and it's got to move through that memory, it could slow things down, right? So, so good data, modeling techniques is that's, I think, been the common theme throughout this whole class here and everything. Do your star schemas, take things to reduce the size. Date and times is one of the big ones, right? Split the date and time into 2 different columns because you'll get better compression from it. Use your star schema. Find ways to monitor what's going on. I couldn't find one tool that's just called Power BI Monitor. But depending on what you have in the back end, if you have a capacity, that you're paying the at least $5,000 a month for. There's reports you could get into that you could see what the CPU usage is, what the memory usage is. I'm in a lot of discussions with other people recently about if you're an admin, you could get all the activity that's going on your Power BI service, and you could find out what's fast, what's slow, talk to different people. So we'll, as time goes on, we could cover even more of that. But within your model itself, right, take a look at the statistics, take a look to see, where there's areas that you could reduce something, especially if you see something that's really big. Do you need it, or do you even have it on the right table? Does it need to be in a dimension that's going to be less number of columns, less number of rows, and more to a relationship to the fact table, because you can make your string sizes smaller than that, smaller using that approach. So remember to keep all of that in mind. Okay, we're almost to the end of this module. So this is like for you guys. Anybody want to come off mute and say, off of these lines, which one is the best practice? And I just see Shilpa put a question in. How do we sort columns before bringing into a data model? So let me go ahead and answer that question. Thanks for that. You could do it a couple of different ways depending on, you could always do it inside of Power Query. There is a sort operator or a sort function that can be called. And what you want to be able to do is you may try different sorting techniques that's going to help the engine do its compression better. The engine does a really good job at compressing, but if you know you have something that is very important to your type of queries and it has a lot of repeating values, if you end up sorting those, you're going to have a better compression against that particular column. That could change the compression against other columns. So sometimes that's like an experiment type of thing of trying to sort it, say either in Power Query or in the, like if you got a SQL data source, if you could sort it inside a SQL ahead of time, you look at what's called query folding, right? You could add a sort step to the SQL source and check to see inside Power BI if it's folding, which means it's sending that sort back to the backend engine. It's going to perform faster. But that's the techniques. So Shilpa, if you wanted to come off of mute and see, does that answer your question? Is there anything more on that question?
Yeah, exactly. So my question was more of, which you mentioned in the latter part. So does the sorting needs to be done, like if I'm using SQL database, so should it be done as a query there, as in, or we should do it in the Power Query? So
Yeah.
Comparison between Power Query and if data source is SQL, so doing it in SQL.
Yeah. If you could get it to be done inside your SQL engine, that's going to be the best. Now, some of that kind of depends on what rights you have to the SQL engine and what it is that you could write across the SQL engine. So for example, if you're not, say, the DBA on it, or you don't have the rights to create objects in there, you could actually write your own native SQL query and put the sort within the native SQL query. So that goes back to it. That would be a way to guarantee that it's going back to the engine. There is some articles that Chris Webb has written on that there's another parameter on the native query to say enable query folding, because if you're doing other things after that, you still want to have query folding. Query folding, if, by the way, I keep using it without defining it. Query folding is a technique to where the steps within Power Query will combine together to produce one query that goes back to the SQL engine. It's SQL mainly, but there are other sources that does query folding, but I tend to think about SQL with it. That's what I experiment on a whole lot. So, but even if you said, you're going to navigate and you're going to get data from a table within SQL, and then you add another step to sort from there, my bet is that would fold and it would send one query back to the engine that would have that sorting. That anything you could do back in your SQL engine is going to perform better than trying to do it within Power Query. But it doesn't mean you don't put the Power Query step in, right? Because the Power Query step could fold. If it can't, then Power Query doing it will, it's just going to do that sort within what's called the mashup engine. So it's going to do it during the model refresh time.
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I see Jane put a comment out in the chat, just I think asking about this this statement here. And we might have, I think this might have actually been on one of the pages and we didn't, maybe it was last session, but let's talk about it here. There's actually a really good video that the SQL BI guys put out this last week, talking about the if statement and the if eager type of thing, but it talked about variables and other things within that. But so not to try to not take it off too far. Variables you could define within your DAX, anywhere that that you have a valid expression, right? So trying to think of I could come up with a good place to use it. Like even right here, I could say I want total sales, and I could give an expression to where I could say var sales equals, and imagine I had something more complex here. Oops. And now the next thing I'm going to have to do is after I have that, I got to do a return. And I'm going to name both of these sales because I like the plural here better. So this is the concept of using a variable. It formatted it a little bit different than I would. We get the same result, but what this slide here is kind of talking about is if you use variables in something that is a repeating calculation, right? So if I want to make this kind of a ratio of, so let's do this, is I could come in here and I could come up with just a calculation where I'm going to have kind of a ratio of sales, right? So if I do a divide, the total sale, what was that? Hang on, let me go back. Sales amount. So imagine what I want to do is get this ratio. I'm going to say divide the sales amount by this isn't a great example. Let's say I want to have a change. The prior year is what works better from that. Sorry, without trying to have something, but let's continue with this. If I just want to say calculate And I'm going to calculate again sales amount. But in this case, I'm going to just say remove filters, which I thought I had to give something, but I think it's optional. I think that remove filters here is going to say remove all filters. So that finishes my calculate. That finishes my divide. Need a little bit more room. So now if I run this, right, I'm going to get a percentage. And I could write this that makes a little bit more sense. That would be with variables. And we'll get to why this helps in the repeating part of it here in just a second. So now if I want to have var sales equals total sales var all sales equals, and it's going to be this calculate. Because that's what I'm doing, is I'm taking the sales that is for this combination of education and customer type, and I'm dividing it by all the sales that exist in the system. Okay, probably would really want that to have some other filtering or whatever, but that's all that's happening in this setup. So now I'm going to say var result equals and instead of this, let's keep consistent. I'm going to go with my variable and my variable again. Oh, sorry, I got to remove this whole thing. So now my divide is a lot easier to read. And I'm going to do a return. I'm going to get the same thing. But the point that was coming up on that, that they were trying to make on comparing using variables versus repeating calculations is, let's say, for example, I was trying to do a year over year, right? So what I would need to do is get my sales for the current filter context, right? Say for current year, then I would calculate my previous year sales. And to get the percentage, I would do sales minus previous year sales divided by previous year sales. Well, by using variables, I could only calculate the previous year sales one time and use it in this, you know, if I had the minus part here, right, that would have been prior year in this, it would end up only being calculated one time, to where if I wrote it like what I showed the first time, and I calculated in each step of the divide function, the engine would actually have to try to calculate that both times. So you're going to get faster performance out of using variables. If.eager in some cases will also help you with that. That's a newer function that just came out within the last couple months. But that's what this one is talking about. Hopefully everybody else kind of got these other ones, right? They just kind of made sense to you. Using is blank is going to be faster than doing a comparison operation against equals blank. Selected value is normally going to be better than has one value. There's still places where you want to check for that you do a check for one value, but if you normally are going to check for a value and get that value back, then you want to use selected values. A lot of times I see doing a selected value and then you're doing an is blank against that selected value. So I'd have to test to see if doing those two steps is still faster than doing has one value then selected value. But that's what their recommendation is. Using divide over using the if error inside of a measure or a calculation, this is going to run faster than doing the standard operation. And then we just covered that. Everybody got 100 on that? Okay. We wanted to hit this slide. I could probably look to see about bringing my Power BI back up. Oh, we're at 2 minutes till. We're just actually, hopefully you guys have used Performance Analyzer before, right? So that's under the View tab, open up Performance Analyzer, start recording, refresh your visuals. For each visual, you will get the timings and the DAX query that you could go explore and look at to try to figure out why something is taking a lot of time. A lot of times what I do after that is then I connect DAX Studio against it and then start debugging what that query is doing to figure out specifically where everything is having performance problems. I think we're still calling this done. There is a Module 6 lab. So if you wanted to go through and do that lab, I'll help explain to you more about Performance Analyzer, some of the other reasons around the best practice. Module 7 was really just a lab and just really kind of summarizing and trying to do a survey and things like that. So I have a couple minutes. I got a minute till 1 o'clock. I could stay a couple minutes afterwards if there's questions that anybody has. I see a thank you in the chat. You're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If I could find where that's at. Did I? Yeah, I recorded this. I don't know why I can't find it now. Let me stop sharing first.